Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and it's time for this week's review of the defense against the Minnesota Vikings. A fine win in Minnesota. The Ravens beat the Vikings after their mini bye. Effort included good pressure, solid coverage for most of the game, although they did certainly give up some yards through the air. And the Ravens eventually, on offense, manufactured a game script that they could exploit after failing in the red zone several times. They finally turned it around and got to a point where the defense could play with the lead and could play some advantage, pin your ears back, pass rush football, and they were better still at that point. Probably the biggest thing of the game, they won the turnover battle 3-0. They've now been 7-0 over the last 3 weeks of this win streak. It included a fumble recovery on special teams, another 2 on defense that they took the ball away. Each of the 2 defensive the interceptions were each different in their own right. Okay, so the first was the loose bracket interception by Starks on the back end, over the top. Good interception, moved toward the play. I call it a loose bracket play because he's arriving at the ball, but he's leaving space between him and the receiver, which allow him the choice of going after the ball if he so chooses to do, usually from behind. In particular, that's even more apparent. Starks was really approaching this one more from the side, but still nice loose bracket. Center fielders play. Played the ball, not the man. Deshaun Elliott would go to the midsection and try and basically separate that midsection of the body from the rest of the receiver, in his desire to knock the football loose. There's a lot more upside if you can go get the football instead, and that's what Starks did. Now 2 weeks in a row, each of those kind of a loose bracket play. Now, in particular, and this is present on the matchup show, if you listen to that with Frazier Tafara and myself, we talked about the need for loose bracket play. And in particular, against a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy, that's a very big deal. The starters, McCarthy's not tremendously accurate down the field, so he overthrows a fair amount. He's naturally a little bit interception wary, but he overthrows just naturally a fair amount. The other thing that it gives McCarthy problems is he has a lot of problems when he does not feel confident in his ability to step into a throw. The Ravens had a lot of traffic in the cone during this game. We'll talk about that a lot. And that caused some high sailing throws from McCarthy, both on ones that were just incomplete passes, but also on 2 that were intercepted. The first one by Starks, again, loose bracket play. The other one was just really good ball tracking by Humphrey. He saw the ball the whole way, the way a receiver would, loped under it effortlessly, caught a ball that was intended for Justin Jefferson in a one-on-one matchup against him. Jefferson went down when their legs got tangled up a little bit, and Humphrey was able to keep his feet and make the play. Now, it's interesting, earlier, Humphrey did not keep his feet and gave up the 62-yard play to Naylor down the left sideline, but that was a really nice play by Marlon to come back and make the play on the second ball, and was very decisive in terms of the spot in the game. The Vikings were coming off a big win, and they were playing at home. You would think, obviously, that would be a significant advantage. I've been to that stadium before. I've been to the Metrodome as well, and both of them are very loud arenas when you're playing offense. Okay, now they're quite quiet when the offense is playing on the field. So the fans know what they're doing. The number of Ravens fans there, well, if you went by the airport, is a lot of them. If we went by the game, there's plenty of Ravens purple within a sea of Vikings purple. But honestly, the Ravens fans weren't making a ton of noise, and that's typically the way it is on the road, that while you can hear the O in the national anthem, that's the one time it really comes out, you can't hear the Ravens fans too much during the game. You certainly couldn't hear them on offense the way you do at the bank when they're trying to actively disrupt the opposing offense. So anyway, basically, Minnesota had an extremely quiet environment to work with, and yet they suffered 8 false starts in the game. I'm going to go through those in this episode in some detail here, because there's some very interesting stuff going on. And also there's some remarks from Kevin McConnell after the game that on as an open-faced sandwich appear to be fairly conciliatory, and this is our problem. And then going a little deeper, you probably can notice that he's upset about something and concerned that the Ravens may have been doing something. So we're going to talk about that. Obviously, that had a really big impact on the game, and some of the Ravens' pass rush success came born of the fact that they had good down and distance situations. Now, one thing penalties will do is they'll put teams in bad down and distance situations. And Minnesota had a lot of 1st and 15s in the game. They had, some plays that ended up being 3rd and 13 instead of 3rd and 8, or whatever it may have been. But they lost significant yardage and progress relative to the sticks with these flags. They had a significant number of additional flags during the game. The Ravens actually had a couple long ones and a couple important DPIs on them, but the Vikings certainly got the worst of it in terms of the penalties here. I don't think there's anything, I'm not looking at the officials and saying they gave the Ravens a bunch of breaks, because I don't think that's true. I think they had a bunch of unable to hold their water along the offensive line, and the offensive personnel overall. It wasn't even just the line. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Ravens had their best pass rush effort of the season, I would say, particularly given that this was on the road. They did pretty well against the Browns early in the year. They've had some decent pass rush games, but they had the arrival of Dre'Mont Jones. He had immediately a fairly significant impact on the pass rush. And the other of the Jones brothers, Travis, played extremely well as well. Played probably his best game of his Ravens career. Extremely dominant as a pass rusher, and also played the run quite well. And we'll talk about that in some significant detail. Of course, one of the big things they did is they won the snap battle 66-61. The Ravens have been laboring this season to put together drives of any length. They still had some problems with that in this game, not really having good sustained drives. But the fact that they got over 60 for the second time all year is nice at a minimum. And they've been in the 50s for most of the season, and it's been horrific in terms of trying to keep the defense rested specifically. So the offense plays a big role in terms of creating opportunity for the defense, both in terms of game script. You want to get ahead in games. That'll give you a chance to pin yours back, to get some good turnover opportunities, get some good pass rush opportunities. But you also want to be more rested. And that means play fewer snaps. And by the way, don't let anybody tell you it's time of possession. It's not time of possession. Basically, you want your defense on the sideline resting for as long as possible. That doesn't have anything to do with time of possession, because the actual clock time, which is the actual resting time, meaning the real world clock time, is generated by plays and TV timeouts. And the plays are the controllable element, and each one takes approximately the same amount of time to reset the football, to make your substitutions, to get started again, to reset the play clock even after an incomplete pass, say. All of those take approximately the same amount of time. So your defense benefits just as much from an incomplete pass as it does from a run play that goes for 10 yards, even though the game clock runs more on a run for 10 yards, fairly obviously. So play count is the statistic you want to be looking at to determine relative tiredness of the two teams. And that'll almost always show up on the field in certain ways that the players will carry themselves. Most notably, hands on hips is usually the big indicator of being tired. And a lot of the players that the Ravens had been leaning on for tremendous amounts of snaps, probably beyond their means, they got a little bit of respite from the arrival of Dre'Mont Jones and the fact the Ravens now had a more normal complement of 5 defensive linemen and 4 outside linebackers for this game. Dre'Mont himself played right around 40 snaps, might have been 39. But that also allowed Mike Green to play fewer snaps than he'd been playing. And Mike Green had a terrific game. David Ojabo played fewer snaps because of it. David Ojabo went from 35 snaps the previous week to 10 this week. And I think that probably had a positive, well, I don't think probably, I think it definitely had a positive impact on the Ravens' quality of defensive play to have Dre'Mont Jones replacing Ojabo for a number of snaps. So positive situation there. The offense had trouble converting in the red zone. That was one of the holdups to getting good game script manufactured. They had, their first four scores were field goals to go up 12-0. And they were basically struggling to create positive game script there. And they're not the 2000 Ravens on defense in terms of they can beat you into oblivion with a combination of turnovers and 3 and outs that, they can generate game script positively even when they get 1 first down and a punt on offense. That's not who this Ravens team is. So they really need some help from the offense. And they had a lot of trouble getting it early, but then the Ravens finally got it going offensively in the second half, pretty much. They were significantly behind early. I'm going to say they gave up another touchdown on the first drive, which is always bad. Brandon Croxton will be on to do a shortly about the Ravens' lack of success on the first drive of the game, but giving up a touchdown on the first drive, particularly after you've already gone 3 and out yourself, is a really negative game script place to start. And they did. They got back in the game reasonably quickly. They got a field goal, but they still had the halftime double possession situation to look forward to. Not positively, obviously. The Ravens fortunately controlled the end of the first half, finished the first half with a field goal of their own, which is a big positive element. They got the Vikings off the field on 3 plays with I think a minute and 14 to go, and still manufactured a drive of their own to get in field goal range. So that big swing just on that, and then they stopped the Vikings to start the third quarter. So that was a very, very big point in the game in terms of the Ravens reversing where the game script was, and so down 10-9, I think, at halftime. Yeah, they came back and rolled up a 19-10 lead in fairly short order thereafter. That included the fumbled kickoff. So, what else we have? It's 7-0 in turnovers the last 3 games. Outstanding. It's probably been the biggest story about the Ravens' defensive turnaround is how well they've assimilated to various ways of getting turnovers. What they did on special teams. I mean, they had a lot of shots on goal on special teams in this game. They dislodged the football 3 times on kickoff returns, twice on 1 play. Okay, where the ball was fumbled by the original return man, who I think might have been Price. And then picked up by somebody else, a tight end, and then dislodged again, where he happened to recover it himself at the bottom of a pile up. But the Ravens, recovered 1 of 3 fumbles that they caused on kickoffs, and I think it's always good to think of the more shots on goal you have, the better your chance to pile up some significant takeaways, and the Ravens did a good job with that in this game. All right. Talking about some of the roster changes that have occurred, there were some pretty significant ones going into this game. One of them, we won't talk about the offense to any great degree here, but they made a big change in the active game day roster, and one I think that flew under the radar for a lot of people. They activated Carson Vinson as the backup left tackle, and as far as I know, healthy scratched Joe Noteboom. So I didn't hear a question asked about that, but it might have been, was he sick, or could he not go, or was it just a coach's decision to go with Noteboom? I believe it was just a coach's decision. I didn't see anything on the injury report all week that would indicate that Joe Noteboom was not going to play. He's been very underwhelming in terms of his play so far for the year, so it's not surprising. If they had other options, they would take it. I just did not feel like it was likely that Carson Vinson was ready to go, but Warhop may have given the thumbs up and said, Vinson's now as ready as going to be ever be. And they've had problems with Ronnie Stanley finishing games, so it's a big chance to take to put Carson Vinson out there on the active roster, because he very well might have to play. And fortunately, Stanley played the whole game this time. But Carson Vinson on the active roster. Other moves they made that are more specific to the defense, they obviously acquired Dre'Mont Jones, and that filled out the defense in terms of the front 9. So they started the game with the healthy number of 9, 5 defensive linemen and 4 outside linebackers in the front 5. I don't think you should ever play an NFL game with fewer than that. It'd be okay to play with 10 under certain circumstances, particularly if your outside linebackers are providing you special teams value. You might go 5-5 in a game. I always hate, and you guys will hear me talk about it all the time. It could be on the bingo card, like we talk about. 4 defensive linemen is just not something you want to ever take a risk with going into an NFL game. And 3 outside linebackers, which they played with each of the last 2 weeks, is also not something you want to do. And it requires specialized defensive packaging and whatnot to overcome. The Ravens did some of that. I don't think it's ideal for them to be playing a lot of uncovered nickel. They got away from some of that this game. They still played it for 3 snaps, but they they largely they had the personnel to play the full range of packages in this game. This was a game also where Marlon Humphrey went down. So I guess I didn't talk about Sanusi Kane and Alexander. Alexander traded, Sanusi Kane cut, Sanusi Kane re-signed to the practice squad. The two guys who replaced them were Keandre Jackson and Keon Martin, and they both starred in this game. Keon Martin had a tremendous impact on the last drive of the game in terms of getting the Vikings stalled up and not even in a position where they could try a Hail Mary throw. And Keandre Jackson forced the fumble and recovered it on the kickoff that went to the Vikings that they turned around and scored on. So that's a big plays from both of those guys. Keon Martin came in as the nickel in dime packages. So he has a slot corner, I should say, in dime packages, because Ravens didn't play any standard nickel. Again, they played 100% big nickel for, I guess it's now 4 straight weeks now. So they've fully committed to Hamilton at the line of scrimmage. Now, one of the really interesting stories of this was the false starts. Now, the Vikings had 8 false starts in a game at home. Obviously, crowd noise should not have been a factor, and I can tell you, being there, it was not a factor. You could hear a pin drop in the places, the way it was just, we were describing it to each other at the airport. There wasn't any real noise on that. So the question comes up is, why would the Vikings be having so much trouble with their own cadence in a quiet home environment? And it's interesting because I listened to the Vikings head coach interview, Kevin O'Connell, after the game, and he talked about, you just can't do this against a good football team. It didn't seem like it was any one reason. I asked our players, and he was asked the question directly, were the Ravens doing something to mess you up? And little background on this. The defense is allowed to do certain things that are in their normal mode of operation at the line of scrimmage. They're allowed to move the line. They're allowed to make move calls. But what they're not allowed to do is do anything that mimics or makes it difficult for the offense to hear the cadence calls. Okay. So they can't do that. And so basically, I think most defenses take that to mean don't be yelling at while the snap count is going on, or you might get a delay of game foul. One player who had several of those in his career was Peter Boulware. So he would often gibber away at the line of scrimmage during the cadence, and it might have been trash talk in his case. I'm not really sure what he was trying to do, because as a down lineman, he probably wouldn't have been giving directions to other defensive members. I think he's probably trying to bait the left tackle or beat the right tackle, whoever he's going up against with some sort of talk. But he got flagged for that, a few times in his career. The Ravens were flagged for it once in 2024. Now, the penalty is delay of game. It's only a 5-yard penalty. It's not a personal foul or anything like that. But it's still, you wouldn't want to accrue any number of those. But we've seen the Ravens get flagged for that sort of thing before. This game, I'm just going to tell you, every situation seemed to be a little bit different, but there was evidence as I looked through this of the Ravens having a hand in generating these false starts. So to talk you through them really briefly, go through them one at a time. Q2 11:55, the center Brandell moved the ball pre-snap. Really did not seem to be related to the Ravens, but Hamilton moved over center, and that was the point at which Brandell flinched with Hamilton standing over him. Now, the Ravens had no answer for Kyle Hamilton. Sorry, the Vikings had no answer for Kyle Hamilton as a pass rusher in this game. So it's not really shocking to think that a guy who's responsible for the line calls in terms of blocking might be distracted by the presence of number 14 right opposite him at the line of scrimmage. So I don't know if Hamilton said anything. It's not apparent that he did, but he moved over top of him, and that may have caused him to become distracted, flinch with the football. And by the way, the flinch of the football, it's not even, I can't even really see it on TV. It's maybe just a trivial move of the football, but the Ravens caught it, and the linesman caught it and threw the flag. So anyway, that was that. Move on. Q2 803, the second one. This was on the first of 3 on O'Neal, the right tackle. And this time, Hamilton, our friend, is opposite O'Neal, but off the line of scrimmage. There's no apparent reason that I can see for the flinch. It is possible Hamilton said something pre-snap, but there's no apparent reason for why O'Neal flinched on that play. So we'll just move on to the third one, which is Q3 717. That was the tight end 85, who's Urasek, I believe. And guess who's opposite him? Kyle Hamilton, who moves up to the line of scrimmage with Dre'Mont Jones. And number 85, Urasek, flinches at the line of scrimmage. Again, I think there's a possibility that this is related. I didn't really notice a triggering move, and there is some of that later where there's an effort by two Ravens to make a coordinated move down the line of scrimmage that might look like they're simulating the start of a snap. That's not what I saw on this play, but it's worth a look. And I'm giving you all the time references just in case you want to go back and look yourself. We move on to quarter 3, 255. And this one is on the left tackle, Darisaw. We saw Mike Green opposite him is fidgeting. But it appears that the triggering element was a check call by McCarthy. So McCarthy goes to his helmet and says something different, and all of a sudden Darisaw is up out of his stance. That one is clearly on McCarthy. It wasn't a matter of anything the Ravens did on that particular play. Number 5, Q4 957. This one was on the wide receiver Jefferson. As you can see, it's not any one group. You know, Brian O'Neal had 3 of these, but otherwise it's 5 other individual players, and it's not all linemen. It's the quarterback had one, the wide receiver had one, a tight end had one. You know, so it's not any one guy. But Jefferson made a move, and in that case, I think there was potentially a trigger from the Ravens that Wiggins and Van Noy, who were covering, Wiggins was the outside player covering Jefferson, and Van Noy was at the end of the line of scrimmage, kind of in a 7 or 9 technique, and I can't remember which he was on that particular play. Each move kind of towards the line of scrimmage, actually toward down the line of scrimmage at the start of the play. So it's almost like Wiggins has simulated some sort of a blitz, and Van Noy is triggering the snap of the ball, or simulating the snap of the ball, and that caused Jefferson to flinch. It would not surprise me if this is the kind of play that's sent to the NFL and said, "Hey, look, the Ravens did this, and this is clearly a violation." Blah 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 blah, and there'll be a lot of tears associated with that. But I don't think they did anything I don't think they said anything. I think it was a matter of their flinchy little movements caused the flinchy little movement from Jefferson, and that was what was flagged for a false start. Move on to number 6. It's a Q4 535. This one is all on McCarthy. He bent over in the shotgun, and rather than maintain his position, he moves his right foot slightly. And I'm not talking about a heel raise. I mean, he lifted his entire right foot off the ground. It's not much, but it's enough for a false start to be called. The Ravens were all over it as soon as it got out. They were pointing it out, and I think the umpire threw the flag from behind the play. So that one was 100% on McCarthy. We go forward to Q4 328, number 7. This one is also on O'Neal. We saw a jitter step from across the line of scrimmage from Van Noy, not completely on the Ravens side of the line of scrimmage. Another one that might go to the league in terms of his jitter step causing a flinch out of O'Neal. And by this point, I can just tell you in the stands, the Vikings fans are groaning in disbelief at this number of false starts that they're accumulating. Not sure if this would qualify in any way, shape, or form as being an act that should have drawn a delay of game penalty. I don't really believe so, but I'm just trying to describe to you the plays as best I can, going through all of them. The last one, and they're still having them at Q4 047, so the very final drive of the game, we have Hamilton again moving up to the line of scrimmage on the outside of the right tackle. He showed rush, and they were overloaded on that side there. He showed a little bit of movement, and O'Neal flinched immediately, and that was the 8th false start of the game. Nothing that was Hamilton was being flagged for in that case. So really interesting. There's a lot of different reasons for all those false starts, and some of them appeared like the Ravens may have played a role in it. And I think there's games like that go on every week in the NFL. I will say that this would be classic Harbaugh to find an advantage play like this and leverage it as much as possible. And need I only remind you about the 2 intentional holding calls on punts, the first in Super Bowl 47 that almost won the game all by itself, and the second against the Bengals, I think in 2014, where they just held everybody and basically dragged them to the ground, and the game ended, and the official had to come on and say there's no, by rule, there's no stoppage of or no extra untimed down based on a offensive foul. And Harbaugh knew that only too well and looked for a way to get that game over with without really punting the football away. In both cases, by the way, the punter took a safety at the end of those games. The punter in 2014, which I think was still Cook. I think he actually ran out of the end zone with 0 seconds remaining, and he ran out of the end zone with 3 seconds remaining in the Super Bowl, and that set up the free kick, which ended on Bynes' game-winning tackle to win Super Bowl 47. So Harbaugh is no stranger to advantage play, and I think you got to just give him a significant tip of the cap for this one. This is about as much impact as a head coach can have on an NFL game in terms of the actual on-field play, as you'll see. Obviously, you can do things to put your players in good positions, but if they saw an opportunity and they thought this was a team we'd like to try this against, they found the right pony to bet on, is all I could say. The Minnesota Vikings delivered for them, and it looked like if you had to pick the individual Ravens who did the most, it's pretty clearly Van Noy and Hamilton that seemed to be the most savvy. And Van Noy also had a false start induced against the Dolphins. So the Ravens are maybe onto something here. Wouldn't surprise me if there is something that goes through the competition committee next year to more clearly define what is not allowed by the defense. And the reason I say that is college football has a new rule in 2025 that if a defensive line shift causes the offense to false start, it is not a false start penalty. It's actually a delay of game penalty on the defense. So that's had it's been received positively some places, not everywhere, certainly. And it's a departure from the way we're used to seeing football played. In fact, it's something the offense can look to take advantage of if they see the defense shifting their alignments at the line of scrimmage and they jump up. They may be able to claim legitimately that they were induced to false start under the current rules anyway. All right. So getting back to other elements of this game, the secondary dressed 9. They leaned on the dime for the most obvious passing situations were 24 plays. The dime has not had great results. The great results for the Ravens in recent weeks, and we'll get this a little bit later, are in big nickel. That's been the dominant package for the Ravens, and it's the kind of the base package where Hamilton has the most influence over the game. Seems to be where they do the best. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. The Ravens did absolutely win the high leverage downs in this game. Minnesota managed just 3 of 14 on third down. They went 2 of 5 on their fourth down attempts. Some of them were very short. They had a bunch of 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1 was an interception, 4th and 2, 4th and 3, they failed. So, the Ravens got them on some short yardage plays. It's not like it was a bunch of 4th and longs that they went for. They did have a 4th and No, they had a 4th and 4 on the final drive. So even then, with their third miss was from fairly manageable distance. And they completed a 4th and 10 for a touchdown too. So it's not like they didn't have any success, but they had a lot of trouble. One thing that the down and distance situations did to the Vikings was it made it very difficult for them to run the ball effectively. And they had some good runs. They ran the ball for, I think, 6.7 yards per carry, but they only ran the ball 18 times in the whole game. So with the down and distance scripts they just had a lot of trouble doing it. And part of that number was fueled by a 26-yard scramble by McCarthy on that final drive, which wasn't even really a positive play in some ways because it burned 25 seconds off the clock. But it was it contributed to that high yards per run number that they had. They had other good runs too. They ran for 17, 13, 12, during the game. So it's not like they didn't have a bunch of good runs, but when they'd have a good run, they'd often have a false start around there. They'd run for a first down on first down, then they have a false start, and all of a sudden they're 1st and 15, and they had a lot of trouble then. I think I need to check this again because I know I want to say, and I said it incorrectly, I believe, on a post-game thing, but they had several drives stalled by false starts. It's 1, The first two did 3, 4. Just working through this. Give me a second here. That's 5. Looks like they had 5 drives that were stalled by false starts. Make it 6. Okay. So that's pretty incredible, and that it wouldn't normally be that high a percentage of drives that were stalled by a false start. So what that means is they didn't get a first down subsequent to a false start penalty on any of those 6 drives. And actually, one of those is not a stall. It's actually they scored a touchdown on 4th and 10, so that it would be only 5 drives stalled. Still outstanding that the Ravens could generate that kind of an advantage. All right. So in terms of, I think some of the general schematic components, that's it. I want to talk about some pass rush coming up, but before that, we'll talk about the packages. They did not have tremendous package variation. We'll go through what they did. They had 1 snap of jumbo. They put 4 down linemen on the field on 4th and 1. And guess what? The Vikings decided to throw the ball, and they threw a long interception to Humphrey down the middle of the field, trying to take advantage of a one-on-one matchup with Justin Jefferson. O'Connell talked about it after the field and said, I'll take that play every time. Their feet happen to get tangled up. That's going to happen in football, but we want to take as many of those shots as we can when we have a one-on-one matchup. Jefferson on anybody. And Humphrey tracked the ball, didn't fall down on that play, and made the play. So great play by him. And interesting, the Ravens were able to make that happen with a jumbo package on the field. I think they only had 3 defensive backs on the field, if I recall correctly, on that play too. I'll find the interception here real quick. Yeah, they only had 3 defensive backs. Gilman, Hamilton, and Humphrey were on the field, but they didn't have Starks. And they didn't have Wiggins on the field on that 4th and 1 play. They were looking to get big and stop the run. O'Connell said he was going to come back and run for it on 4th down if they hadn't completed the pass. But then, of course, as intercepted, he didn't have that opportunity. So anyway, what do we got now? Package, we talked about jumbo. 1 base. It was a run for 4. The 31 big nickel snaps. And this is all with Hamilton at slot corner. They didn't deviate from that at all. 31 plays, 127 yards, 4.1 yards per play, 1 turnover. The Ravens have been dominant as hell these last few weeks in big nickel. And I want to give you an idea. Let's go back and take a look at the numbers one game at a time. So it was 4.1 in this game versus Miami. In big nickel, they allowed 5.6 yards per play, ran it 32 times for 179. So that's okay. It's not great. In the previous game against Chicago, they ran big nickel 36 times for 132, 3.7 yards per play. That's exactly what you want. And then the first week that they really went to it was against the Rams. And you think about what the Rams offense has done recently. They held the Rams 38 plays, 192 yards, 5.1 yards per play. So it's been a very impressive run for the big nickel specifically. And the fact that Hamilton is in that spot at slot corner is really the deciding factor there. Now, interestingly enough, the team has not played nearly as well in the dime. And for a lot of reasons, the dime should be more effective. You got a more advantageous down and distance. When you're on 3rd down, generally speaking, from a philosophical standpoint, the offense is so focused on making a first down that they actually reduce their yards per play and help you out in terms of yards per play. But in this case, it just wasn't the case. They had all sorts of success throwing the ball around on the Ravens on 3rd down and on obvious passing situations. 211 yards on 24 plays, 8.8 per play. They played all the 3 safety dime with Hamilton at that weak side linebacker spot. He was typically either off ball or mugging an A-gap, but there's a lot of value in having Hamilton not mug an A-gap because he has a lot of choices he can make from that spot. And you can actually empower a player like Hamilton to either rush or cover. He's been so effective, but anyway, in this case, that when they had him off ball in the middle of the field, it wasn't nearly as effective as having him control the strong side of the field where they typically have 3 receivers. Most NFL sets are 3-by-1, and wherever your slot corner is going to be on the 3 side. And that's, all the things that you do trying to either run or pass the ball to the strong side of the field, Hamilton then has an influence over. So it's easy to see. It's possible to see, I guess, why Hamilton might be even more effective when in that position. All right, the team played 3 snaps of uncovered nickel. I mentioned this before, but uncovered nickel is when you have 3 defensive linemen, but just 1 outside linebacker along a 4-man front. You still have a nickel. You still have 2 inside linebackers. They had 3 plays of that, and they allowed 23 yards, 7.7 yards per play. Obviously, not much of a sample size, but that when they did that, they used Brent Urban as the edge in those situations. They used it 10 times the previous week against Miami. The arrival of Dre'Mont Jones, I think, is going to reduce the amount that they employ this package significantly, and we've already seen it reduced to 3. But it wouldn't surprise me if it basically went to 0 over the course of the next few weeks, particularly if they don't like the results. If the results aren't good, there's extra incentive to get rid of the package. So it's just one way to line up differently when the other team's either in 12 or 21 personnel to try and be able to stop the run on early downs when you have a paucity of outside linebackers on your active roster. All right, they played 1 snap of quarter. It was the game-ending play where the Ravens had 7 DBs on the field, and they obviously ended up getting it stopped. I think that the player who was most amazing on that play was Mike Green, because McCarthy held the ball for 10 full seconds looking for somebody to throw to. And the Ravens only rushed 3 on the play. There's obviously an ample time and space opportunity. Well, maybe not obviously, but it was an ample time and space opportunity. He was never moved off his spot during the first 3 seconds is all that means. But Mike Green kept going like the Energizer Bunny, or maybe more appropriately, Michael McCrary 2000, looking at trying to get to the quarterback and never giving up. And he finally delivered the quarterback hit after 10 seconds as McCarthy threw the ball that was short and incomplete to, I guess it was to Jones near the left sideline. And that finished the ball game on that 4th and 4 play. But Mike Green, that is one of the most impressive 10 seconds of football you'll ever see. He had a couple of similar plays in this game. I'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into the individual notes in the second episode. But I think Mike Green played very well. It did not come out with a particularly good PFF pass rush grade, I noticed. But in my book, he played very well rushing the passer and maintaining a very high motor. And it was extremely effective. I could not be more excited than I am now for the 3 Central Ravens defensive rookies. This is the absolute high watermark for the season of being excited about the play of Starks, which is fairly obvious coming off 2 fantastic games in a row that he's had. Mike Green now playing at his highest level, and also Teddy Buchanan, who I think had a very good game this week and was very, very central to the turnover attempts last week with him making the tackle as a couple of forced fumbles were inflicted upon the Dolphins. So it's been a great couple of weeks here, a great 3-game winning streak for these rookies, and they seem to be making real progress. And in a lot of ways, I look at the rest of the season, and if you're trying to find the reasons to believe that this is a Super Bowl team, I think you could look at the ascension of these 3 rookies as being one of the very significant means to get them there. That those 3 guys could lead the way. Starks, I think everybody is at least excited about who he is. And I'm not talking about, did you like Emanwari better? Or did you like Starks better? Because everybody knows my feelings on that. I'm just talking about Starks was a exciting player to add to the roster. He was at least a 2nd-round value. The Ravens got him in the 1st round. Mike Green was a 1st-round value. The Ravens got him in the 2nd round. If you weren't excited about getting those 2 players on draft night, I don't know what's going to help. I might suggest Viagra, but I don't know if that would work. If you really can't get excited about those 2 draftees. So anyway, then Buchanan came along in the 4th round, and his play has been solid, I think, to date. He's had some coverage issues. This was a good game in coverage for him. So one that I think gives us real hope. He continued to tackle effectively after having a big tackle count that earned him that Defensive Rookie Player of the Month award in October. He has accumulated more value, I would say, in November so far than he did in October. I think he's, in terms his game this week might have been his best to date. So very happy with the performance of those 3 players. Let's move on and talk about a little bit about pass rush. Let me see. I'm doing okay on time. Okay, so pass rush. They gave ample time and space 15 times, 35% of the time to McCarthy. That's a lot. By the way, it's about maybe 7% higher, the 7 percentage points higher, which is about 25% more opportunities over this number of plays than I would hope for. So maybe they should have had 12 and they had 15 instead, kind of thing. He had 112 yards on those plays, 1 interception, and 7.5 yards per play. So actually, he's about a yard per throw below expectation on those ample time space. Definitely did not make the most of them. And if I'm recalling correctly, well, one of the interceptions was the ample time space. The other was with pressure. So anyway, McCarthy did not certainly make the most of those ample time space. And some of them ended up being late pressure anyway, where he had plenty of time to throw, didn't get rid of the football. And then his own lack of pocket awareness got him get himself in trouble, the way that we've seen happen to Tyler Huntley at times in the past. Tyler Huntley just doesn't have that internal clock that's particularly good. And McCarthy, probably, if you're looking to ride a young quarterback for holding the ball too long, I'd say he's it, because I don't think he makes up for it with the quality of scrambles and throws off schedule that, say, Lamar Jackson does. Certainly not that Lamar Jackson does, but then that other mobile quarterbacks frequently do. All right, let's move on. Talk about ball out quick. 9 plays, 21% of the time. That's very low, by the way. They got the ball out quick. So as much as McCarthy, people kind of think of him as being a guy who gets rid of the ball fairly quickly, he's really a holder. And 51 yards on those plays, 5.7 yards per play. That's just a hair below expectation. Cost himself about 3 yards relative to where he should be at about 6 yards per play. And then with pressure, the Ravens got pressure 19 times. Now, the first thing to look at in terms of pressure and ATS, as a defense, you always want more pressure than ATS. But you probably also, well, maybe for variance purposes, it's actually better that if you're higher in both. As long as you're higher pressures than ATS, you'd want to eliminate ball out quicks entirely. Ball out quicks have one thing that they have going for them, is they have very low variance associated with them, because by their nature, they don't include any sacks. They obviously don't include penalties either if the ball's out quickly, because it's not those. I wouldn't include a holding penalty, say, that would occur on such a play. So they tend to be complete a very high percentage of the time. 80 or more percent of the time, your ball out quicks are going to be complete. And when they are complete, they're usually for a short amount of yardage, and they average pretty close to the 6 yards per play that I've got plugged into my expectations formula. That would give the offense plenty of ability to keep up with the down and distance requirements that they have. So generally speaking, I think ball out quicks are good for the offense and they're bad for the defense. So if you're going to have, as long as you have more pressures than ample time and spaces, the defense can gain a lot from having a lot of pressure opportunities and having them all be decided as pressure opportunities in ample time and space. Let's put it that way. So with pressure, they got pressure 44% of the time, 82 net yards on those 19 plays, 4.3 yards per play. The average is about 3.5. So McCarthy was a little above average on those plays. And looking back to it, now they had ample time and space on the 62-yard throw. So I was thinking that was a part of it. The 10-yard touchdown and another 28-yard throw later in the game were both with pressure. So on the second to last drive, when they scored their touchdown, then they ended up going for the 2-point conversion and missing it. That drive included a couple of big pressure throws where McCarthy really bailed the Vikings out of some bad situations. So anyway, pressure didn't work uniformly for the Ravens, but in any sense. But they had 1 sack, 1 turnover, and McCarthy was 16 yards above expectation on those plays. So for the entire game, despite a really poor game, which was largely turnover related in terms of his quarterback rating, he underperformed his opportunity set only by 2 net yards in total. Also, the Vikings drew a couple of big DPI penalties, actually 3, I guess, on the game, 2 on Roquan Smith and 1 on Awuzie during the game. So there was certainly some flagging going off on the Ravens secondary in the game. All right, let's look at numbers now for a second. One of the things that Orr's been doing more recently is using more numbers and a little bit less deception. This time he's back to a very moderate amount of numbers. He rushed 5+ on only 23% of plays. Very modest rate against, for example, Houston. They were at 42%, Chicago 41%. They were lower against Miami, but they at 23%. It's a fairly low total relative to the rest of the season. I want to go through the numbers by results, and I'll need to bring up my spreadsheet for that. So give me just a second. All right. So this is one of the things that I noticed about the game is they used a 3-man pass rush 3 times in the game and gave up 62 yards or 20.7 yards per play. Now, the 62 yards effectively all came on the 62-yard throw on 3rd and 4 on the very first drive. And then they had 2 incomplete passes, or maybe it was interception and incomplete. No, 2 incomplete passes. So it's not as if they didn't succeed at all. And there are people who would point to the play on the left sideline to Naylor being one where Humphrey fell down. And so it's not really fair to say that the scheme didn't work out, but they allowed a big play out of only 3 with a 3-man pass rush. Now here's where it gets good. With a 4-man pass rush, they used that 30 times for 127 yards, 4.2 yards per play, and 1 turnover. Didn't have any sacks on that, but the 4-man pass rush was sufficient to generate enough pressure that the Vikings were not able to do much against it. So I thought that was a very positive sign. When you're able to rush 4 and be effective, you're going to win a lot of football games. And the 1960s Rams or the 1970s Cowboys, or any number of other teams in the NFL history that have been good with it, can attest that's a great way to win football games with a 4-man pass rush. They did rush 5 plus 10 times, as I mentioned, and those plays went for 5.6 yards per play. They did have a sack and a turnover. So I look at that, and the 5.6 yards per play is right on average for the game, and they got some good variance out of it in terms of the sack and the turnover. So I'd say the Ravens benefited from those plays as well. So I'd look at those, both of those, as all the 4+ passing rush that they did as fairly successful in this game. Now, what was not as successful is the deceptive elements. So they were really not successful individually. They used 9 off-ball blitzes during the game, 0.21 per play. One of those was a double, so it's 8 plays involved, and they gave up 89 yards on those plays, 11.1 per play. That did include 5 pressures, but it also included an ample time and space and a ball out quick. And anyway, there was a blitz on the 62-yard play, which also happened to be a deceptive rush and a simulated pressure. So that ends up showing up in a lot of these deceptive plays here and ruining the totals, but it is what it is. Stunts, now that did not include the 62-yard play, but they ran 5 stunts during the game. They also did run a couple that were on plays that were either negated by penalty or ended up being runs, ended up being quarterback scrambles. So this wasn't all the stunts they ran in the game, but it was 5 that were on plays that ended up being unpenalized passes or sacks. And those plays went for 7.4 yards per play, 2 ample time and spaces they gave up during that, 1 ball out quick. I think they probably minimized stunt calls versus McCarthy because they wanted to control rush lanes. I did not notice the Ravens using a spy often in this game, if at all. And so they were really depending on the defensive line. And they have the normal short zone defenders who could have been effectively spies to control McCarthy, but they were defending on the defensive line to maintain good rush lanes that would keep him from scrambling effectively. Simulated pressures, they had 8. Those really did not work out. And I mentioned the 62-yard play is in there again. And with 8 plays, that's going to raise the average substantially. But they got actually 13.5 yards per play on those 8 plays. It did include 1 interception. And let's see which that interception was. The Humphrey interception, which was a 6-2 pass rush, so a 2-man simulated pressure on that play. With 1 interception, as I said, 3 pressures and 5 ample time and space opportunities. By the way, that's really bad. If you give up 8 plays with 5 ample time and space opportunities, any way you slice it, it's bad. But it's really bad when you're trying to confuse the opposing quarterback and you're using essentially positioning elements to try and get a pass rush advantage, and then you don't, and you give up an ample time and space climbing play. You've not only have you given the quarterback extra time to throw, but you've also given him an opportunity versus defensive players who are not well positioned to drop from the line of scrimmage into coverage and be effective. So it's a double-edged sword, or double whammy, if you want to call it that, for when you run simulated pressure and you don't have a good pressure rate on those plays. They used 2+ elements on only 2 plays the entire game, and those went for a total of 71 yards. Guess what? A 62-yard play and a 9-yard play. So not obviously what Orr would have liked, but that's where we were. If you look at the biggest individual pressure generators of the game, we'll talk about some of these in the individual notes, but Travis Jones was the man for the Ravens in this game. He had contributions to 7 pressure events, as I scored it: a sack -3, a quarterback hit that was also a pass defense, 3 pressure events that were all his own, and let's see, that only sounds like 6. So I'm missing one there. I think he had another pass defense late. That's what it was. So another late pass defense at the line of scrimmage. I'll take a pass defense anytime you'll give it to me in terms of that. And I also consider it a pressure event, and not just a batted pass line of scrimmage. I think PFF and I probably have the same 6 plays we've highlighted for that, or scored as pressures. Dre'Mont Jones, the new arrival, 5 pressures, a quarterback hit, a late quarterback hit. Anytime you put the quarterback on the ground, it's worth mentioning, and I included in the pressure totals, even though when I say late quarterback hit, I'm saying he got there after 3 seconds, so it doesn't really count as kind of a first pressure type pressure. It's more of a cleanup play. He had 2.5 other pressures, so he had a very significant impact. Played, I think, 39 snaps, and all but 4 were in pass defense situations, and he definitely was a big element of the pressure. The other was Hamilton. Now, Hamilton, I don't know how many times he rushed the passer in total, but I'm going to look it up. So, look at this game. How many times did he rush the passer in total? Hamilton rushed the passer 8 times and had 4 pressure events. So 2 pressures that were also passes defense. Very high value plays, folks. 1 pure quarterback hit. I was on a nice, blitz through the B gap. 1/2 a pressure otherwise, where he shared it with somebody else, and nothing bad about that, certainly. The Minnesota Vikings don't have any answer for Kyle Hamilton as a pass rusher, and that can be true with players who come from unusual angles to get to the line of scrimmage. So Dre'Mont Jones in his rookie year was an outstanding pass rusher. Nobody could figure him out in terms of getting him stopped. But the Ravens, Kyle Hamilton is more of a known commodity right now in terms of who he is. And the Vikings being an NFC team might have been an advantage for the Ravens in terms of scheming to get home. And Travis Jones, for example, had 7 pressures and Hamilton only had 4, but Travis Jones did it in 38 pass rush attempts. Still a very good game, but from Travis Jones, by the way. He's arguably his best ever pass rush game as a Raven, maybe not even arguably. But it was a lot of opportunities that he had. And Dre'Mont Jones had 34 total pass rush opportunities. And Mike Green had 36 and got home a fair amount with three total pressure contributions. So just the percentage of times getting home for Hamilton, the point is a lot higher than for those. All of Jenkins, Taven Bryan, of all people, and Mike Green had 3 pressure contributions during this game. Bryan, by the way, kind of a very quiet, high pressure effort in this game, including some good pin your ears back time later. He's getting moved around a lot in the run game. He's way too small to be out there playing run defense. I think he creates a natural point of attack for opposing offenses to focus on when he's on the field as a run defender. And they've been using some double teams to really just snowplow him out of the play and clear space to his side that was detrimental to the Ravens from that perspective. He's very effective as a pass rusher. He did the job. And, the Ravens are making a choice right now to have either him or Aeneas Peebles active as the 5th defensive lineman. I don't think we're getting any more from Peebles as a pass rusher than they've gotten from Bryan recently. And I think they're probably the Ravens aren't necessarily incorrect about having him be the guy they want to turn to on a regular basis. It does mean that on the 53 they're now carrying. I think Brian has been activated at the 53. I need to actually check that and be sure. But assuming he has, then the Ravens have 6 defensive linemen on the 53-man roster, which is unusual for this team. They do not typically have 6 active at one time, and we might see a change there at some point. They might have to decide, they can't afford to carry all these big bodies. The team's carrying 3 nose tackles right now. Okoye is another guy who had a pass defense in this game. Beautiful, complex pressure play, by the way, but he ended up getting the pass defense at the end of it by leaping as 3 other guys contributed to the pressure event. So the Ravens seem to be swarming a little bit more. I'll use that word in terms of their pass rush. It looks a lot better than it did early in the year, and the acquisition of Dre'Mont Jones and the ascension of Travis Jones, the return from injury in a lot of ways of Travis Jones. He looks completely healthy in the way he's dominating individual matchups at the line of scrimmage. And the evolution of Mike Green potentially could be 3 reasons you could look at to say, hey, the Ravens pass rush prospects for the rest of the season are actually pretty good. Hey, they have some guys who can get after it now, and hopefully they can make progress with that. Anyway, that's going to do it for the first part of the show. Thanks for listening, folks. Want to thank all the regular listeners, as I always do every show. You mean the world to me to have an audience that is of the quality you are, that I don't have to worry about going over anybody's head. And if I say things that you don't understand, you ask questions about it, and please do that. Work in hashtag Filmstudy mailbag. We'll be getting you some questions in the second part of the show, but I always really appreciate that when you go there. If you have a film study short and you want to talk on air with me just to discuss some project that you're interested in, have had multiple approaches over the course of the last couple of weeks. We'll get most of those done. And it's usually it can be anyway, a very quick process from the germination of an idea to contacting me by DM, usually a brief phone call to talk about what might make it interesting short. And then you put together some bullet points. We talk about them on air, and the show could be done as early as 24 hours, after our first contact. So don't think of this as a painful process. Think of it more as you're calling into a radio talk show and you just have some opinions and you want to chew the fat over the air. That's I want to provide that degree of access to all the listeners in terms of bringing your thoughts to the table and to the audience here for evaluation. But really appreciate you folks. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.